This starting house is the first structure ever added to Minecraft, and it's just one of the dozens of structures ever added to the game since 2010. But we also have every structure that Mojang's removed from the game, like the Pocket Edition exclusive Nether Spire, or this double-decker glitched witch hut. And we'll start with the secret loot that you could only find within the starter house. On January 24th, 2010, Notch added the very first structure to Minecraft, fittingly named the starting house. And inside of the starting house would be filled up with a chest giving you 54 full stacks of TNT, as well as every item in the game stacked up to 99. And while the original look was made entirely of full mossy cobblestone, it was eventually reworked to be planks and stone, which seems a lot more inviting for a house. And I don't know what's more cursed, seeing a stack of 99, or the fact that it's 99 blocks of lava. And on February 27th of that same year, this is when we would get Minecraft's largest structure in history. Though the reason it's this large isn't so interesting, since all it was a brick pyramid that generated all the way up to the world height. And for roughly every 1,000 by 1,000 block area, it would generate exactly one new pyramid, meaning that there could be as much as 976,562,500 pyramids generated in one world. And because the height was so tall, it could actually cause lightning bugs if you went up to the top. And sometimes if it generated too tall, it would just generate with a flat top, meaning it's technically a brick square frustum. Yeah, I had to look that up too. And along with the brick pyramids, we also got these obsidian walls that would generate in the worlds. And back in Minecraft Inf Dev, you would find obsidian walls that would replace all solid blocks which had an X or Z coordinate of 0, giving you this 2-block tall wall that extended across the terrain. And then if you went to 0, 0, you would find where the two walls connect, giving you basically a compass to align yourself on the world. And if they came across a cliff, they would just infinitely scale up until they went over it. And if you wanted to, you could even use these obsidian walls to discover the brick pyramid. Since if you started from the center of the obsidian walls and then turned 45 degrees, then you could walk straight in that direction and eventually end up finding a brick pyramid. The monolith was Minecraft's first accidental structure, since for a brief period in Java Edition Inf Dev during the month of June, you'd get these glitched areas of your world that would cause the terrain to abruptly invert, which can get caused when you use a Perlin noise generator. And not only will we get these huge chunk errors that generate on the surface, but if you go underneath them, then because the bedrock layer was raised up to sea level, that would also make the void easily accessible. On June 25th, the monster rooms were initially added to Minecraft. Also commonly referred to as dungeons, these rooms were so old that they actually predate skeletons using bows and arrows. And if you need another reminder on how old these things are, when you go inside of the chests and look at the loot table, you'd see that they originally used to generate with sulfur in the chests before the item was renamed to gunpowder. And with those monster spawners, we eventually saw them show up again in the mine shafts. On September 14th of 2011, we saw mine shafts enter the game, though originally their support beams used to generate with oak planks instead of oak fences, making it feel a lot more claustrophobic to explore one of these, but also a lot less likely for a cave-in, so I guess take what you can get. When villages were first added to Minecraft, there was no plains village, savannah village, or anything like that. There was just villages, and you could definitely tell that from this very first image, considering that here we see a village generating both on the beach, in the snowy plains, and in the regular plains next to a bunch of giant mushrooms. And while that image was first shown off on July 1st of 2011, it wouldn't be until September 14th that we actually saw these in the game. And along with this, we also saw the villagers get added into the game. Though at that point, they were just called Testificate, which you can see by written in all caps above each of their heads. And there's a reason it didn't say blacksmith, because as Jeb mentioned during the testing, the lava from the blacksmith would often just set the whole village on fire. So it's been over a decade and villagers still are not any smarter. When Jeb first showed off how the strongholds could spawn, originally they were shown off to spawn above ground, looking more like ruins, which I gotta say would have been really cool to see as a way of introducing players into the strongholds naturally. But considering they're meant to be end game, the way that we eventually found them with Eyes of Ender made a lot more sense. And hey, Minecraft did get ruins, but I'm getting ahead of myself. When other fortresses were first added to Minecraft, they were honestly pretty hard to see. And these early screenshots that Jeb showed off when it was a work in progress really go to illustrate that. The original Nether was a lot darker than what we see today, and your best chance of seeing anything light up inside of this would have just been some kind of blazes shooting off fireballs, considering that they were the only reason worth coming to this Nether fortress in the first place. We wouldn't get wither skeletons for a whole another year. And speaking of those wither skeletons, while they're not able to burn in game, when Minecraft made the Minecraft Experience physical pop-up for the villager rescue, there the wither skeletons were actually able to burn in lava where they can in the regular game. On October 6th of 2011, we got the shortest structure to ever be added to Minecraft, or at least shortest lived, because accidentally left in the Java Edition Beta 1.9 pre-release 3 was a debug feature where Mojang left in this glass pillar that marked the location of the stronghold. That way they could easily find where it was during testing, considering that there weren't any Eyes of Ender yet added to the game. Maybe they should have just left it on the surface then, but this was quickly removed, unlike this next structure which was here to stay. After the full release of the game, several months went by without any new structures added to Minecraft, but on May 24th of 2012, we eventually got the new desert villages, which isn't isn't to say that villages didn't generate in deserts before, but when they did, they would just generate made out of wood and cobblestone. And now we finally had these all sandstone options, though the village lamppost could still generate with these floating torches, which would eventually get fixed in snapshot 13W06A. And along with our desert villages, we also got the desert pyramid. And when these were first added into the game, they originally generated with wool instead of hardened clay for the designs. Hardened clay didn't exist back then, though the TNT trap's always been intact, even if sometimes these desert pyramids generate pretty unconventionally. And because of the added world height, we now see a lot more of these desert pyramids generate where they're getting stuck underground, causing these abnormally long sandstone pillars in the caves. And sometimes on the surface, it's even possible for a double pyramid to generate. And considering beacons were added around the same time, it's fitting that a fully powered beacon could be assembled inside of the roof of the desert pyramid. And that wasn't the only pyramid that we got this year, since on May 31st of 2012, the jungle pyramid was added into the game. And these were particularly special to find, not just because they were rare, but because they were the only place to find chiseled stone bricks naturally before an official crafting recipe was added in Java 1.8. And also, there's been a few glitches that have been documented where these jungle pyramids could actually generate over water, making them look a lot more like swamp huts. Which, speaking of, on October 4th of 2012, to coincide with their spooky Halloween update, Mojang finally gave us these witch spawn huts. Or rather, they were supposed to spawn witches. Originally, they did actually spawn witches inside of the witch huts, but they would just despawn like normal monsters, which was then changed in snapshot 16W42A, 4 years after they were added in. And one of the interesting distinctions that we see between these on Bedrock Edition compared to Java is that harming potions actually generate inside of the witch's cauldrons. Though, if you're looking for something on both versions, then you'll notice that only black cats can spawn within the witch hut, making this symbol of bad luck into 100% odds. And what's a lot rarer than that is this double witch hut that spawned once. I just really like this witch hut and wanted to mention it. This structure only existed in Pocket Edition, since back in November 15th of 2012, there wasn't a proper way to get to the Nether Dimension on Pocket Edition. And so that's why Mojang added in the Dome, as they referred to it in the code, better known as the Nether Spire, which when you place down a Nether reactor core in a space like this, then it would generate this huge structure around it as the cobblestone from the Nether reactor turned into a glowing obsidian and then cooled down into a regular obsidian as we then had the rest of the Nether mobs to fight inside. And also inside, we would find a whole chest filled with items that we weren't able to get otherwise because they just didn't exist in the game, which I've got to say really didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, why are cocoa beans in anything related to the Nether? But it was just a temporary solution, and that's why it was removed as soon as the proper Nether was actually added to Pocket Edition. Though that didn't stop players from realizing this fun glitch where if you activated a Nether reactor core at Y level 1, then that would cause the bedrock to be replaced with netherrack, which meant that if you broke that netherrack, you could fall into the void, losing all the special items that you just got yourself. On June 18th of 2014, we first got the Ocean Monument. But unfortunately, the Ocean Monument got some pretty big problems, since the icebergs that could generate would actually have a chance of generating inside of an ocean monument, suffocating Elder Guardians originally. But one of the reasons such a glitch might happen might just be because of the size of this thing. Since as you can see here from the size comparison with the other three pyramid structures, the Ocean Monument's larger than both of them combined and doubled. And why would you even go seek one of these out early on? Well, originally when you would kill Elder Guardians, they used to drop dry sponge items, which was then fixed in snapshot 16W33A to actually be wet sponge, because I mean, they're fish. In 2015, the monster dungeons were renamed into monster houses. And that's because for the Love and Hugs update for their snapshot in April Fools, Mojang replaced the monster dungeon rooms with quartz and made them into monster houses, which then on top of the chests that they generate also had crafting tables and furnaces inside. And while monsters would still spawn from the spawner, they couldn't hurt you in this update, making it safe, if not a bit claustrophobic. At Minecon 2015, Mojang first showed off the End City, which was the new structure that they were planning for the update later that year. And when they did first show it off on Minecon, you can see from this Twitch clip that structure blocks were originally used to manually generate the end cities, as opposed to them generating naturally. And back when the end cities' end ships were first designed, they used to generate with beacons inside. And while those gave you the speed effect, that was actually just a leftover testing feature. And they then got replaced with pumpkins, which is a bit of a downgrade, which then those were replaced with a hopper that contains a book that was written by Sarge, who worked on the team, titling it A Work in Progress, until the whole thing was ultimately replaced to be obsidian and purple blocks. And if you've ever wondered the reason why end cities have beetroot seeds inside of their chests, it's because that on the legacy console editions of the game, before we had proper Bedrock Edition, the world sizes were limited. So this was a way to add it to obtain beetroot in those survival worlds. And then we got it in Java Edition for parity reasons. Pay close attention to this image from Sarge, since if you look towards the top right, you're just able to notice an igloo peeking out. And so it makes sense that a day later, igloos were finally added to Minecraft. And while plenty of people already know about the secret basement that generates underneath some igloos, you might not have known that the sign inside of that basement has gone through a few changes. Originally, it was an arrow pointing to the right and one to the left, and then that was changed to a whole bunch of series of X's like so, until finally a sign where it was an arrow to the left and an arrow to the right. A whole bunch of changes just to get the arrows flipped. And if you ever wondered why there's a furnace inside of the igloo in the first place, it's actually intended that if you use this furnace, it'll melt the ice with enough light level, flooding the carpet and revealing the trapdoor down to that basement. So you can go and see all those arrows by yourself. On May 18th of 2016, we got quite a few structures, starting first with the overworld fossil. Now in testing, the fossils are actually made out of quartz blocks before the bone blocks were added in, which Professor Mobius teased on Twitter before they released. And in 2021, it was noticed that these fossils could occasionally generate floating inside of caves, which would then be fixed 2 months later. The Badlands mine shafts originally started in Pocket Edition before they were ever seen in other versions of the game, and here one of the Mojang developers showed off in an alpha build how these mine shafts could generate on the surface of the Badlands, but they didn't yet actually generate with the dark oak planks that we're familiar with until they were fully added in May 18th of 2016. When taiga villages were added into the game, the snapshot that added them made a pretty confusing change, since because the snapshot said that a village only had to partially be inside of a valid biome to generate, then we could get these taiga villages that we see here that generate mostly inside of other biomes, making it just look like a miscolored plains biome. You notice this happened a lot less with savanna villages though, which were also added in the same update, but those still have their own pretty big bug, since in Bedrock Edition there still exists a code that prevents mason houses from generating inside of savanna villages. And the third of our villages added into the May 18th update was the Abandoned Village, which calling it abandoned is a little bit funny, considering that these villages do still spawn cats. I've never heard anyone call them a cat village. And on the topic of glitches in Bedrock Edition, there used to be a bug that would cause abandoned villages to be a 30% chance on Bedrock Edition, as opposed to the intended 2% chance that we saw in Java, which now is the case on both. In 2016, Mojang had a problem, because they were looking for a way to incorporate the illagers into Minecraft after they had designed them from dungeons, but they didn't know how they were going to do it. And so the Woodland Mansion was the perfect solution, and so on September 28th, it was added into the base game. But unsurprisingly, it was also added with a few bugs, like how the spider room that you find inside of the mansion could actually generate with a pig spawner instead of a spider spawner if you found it on the Legacy Console Edition, or how in the tree chopping room, occasionally other items could generate with Efficiency 1 instead of the Iron Axe. So in Bedrock Edition, you'd actually have a chance of finding things like an Efficiency 1 leather cap, but this is ultimately fixed in preview 1.21.80.20. The first time that we ever saw the ocean ruins was in this picture dropped on Minecraft.net on December 27th of 2017. And if you can't see it, I can't blame you. But when we brighten up this teaser image, you not only see the original texture for the sea turtle, but we also get to see one of the first cold ocean ruins right there in the bottom. And then these would actually be playable in the game on March 1st of 2018. Oh, and a weird glitch worth mentioning for Bedrock Edition is that if these chests for the ocean ruins generate above water, they'll always generate with a water block above it, meaning that we could potentially have floating water above like in this image. I guess it is technically underwater. And 5 days after the ocean ruins, we got proper buried treasure added into Minecraft on March 6th of 2018. And along with it, also got the new record for the smallest structure in the game. Now, when you go to find buried treasure, an old trick that we've shown off in the past is using your player arrow aligned with the X on the treasure map, making sure that at least one pixel pokes out underneath the bottom, always aligning you on top of the treasure chest. But worth noting is that this works differently in Java and Bedrock Edition, considering that in Java, the player arrow is always shown underneath the X of the treasure, but in Bedrock, the arrow is always shown on top, which does make this easier to do on Java Edition. And also on Java, the buried treasure chest contains the highest number of diamonds per chest amongst any of the structures in the game. So while the endgame End City chest might have an average of 1.06 diamonds per chest, inside our Java Edition ones, we can find an average of 1.25 diamonds per chest. It's not a lot more, but when you go and search a whole bunch of these, it's definitely gonna add up. And you didn't have to deal with shulkers to get them, so I think that's definitely worth it. And the only thing rarer than the diamonds you're finding is glitch MC234396, which can also generate pig spawners if it spawns in the same place as a block entity like a mineshaft spawner. The update Aquatic wasn't done adding new things into the game, since on March 13th, we then got shipwrecks added into the game. And on Bedrock, those shipwrecks can be a lot more wrecked, considering they can actually spawn in the sky because of this bug here. But Java also has its fair share of glitches for our shipwrecks, considering that if one of these spawns on a chunk border in between two different biomes, we can actually get it made of two different variants of wood. Like we see here from this one made from dark oak, as well as our regular oak planks. Maybe the reason it sunk was because of indecision. When the pillager outposts were added in November 21st of 2018, they came with a horrible bug, which is that if you removed all the blocks of the pillager outpost above the floor, and then looked down at the pattern, you'd notice that the floor is asymmetrical, missing this corner block here. Yeah, it's completely unplayable. And one thing you might notice is that when you remove all of the pillager outposts to see this is that pillagers can still spawn even if the outpost doesn't have any blocks left. It only has to do with the location of the outpost, which is a lot easier to remove all the blocks and test this on Java Edition, as opposed to these extra tall pillager outposts that sometimes generate on Bedrock. They do look really cool though. The most recent village added in Minecraft is the Snowy Village on December 5th of 2018. But how these snowy villages are defined are a little weird, considering that on Bedrock Edition, the snowy taiga biome spawned the Snowy Villager, despite technically being taiga villages, which would be a whole different villager type. But I understand the confusion, considering that at Minecon Earth 2018, originally these were shown off as the textures for the taiga variants, but they ended up being used for the snowy villagers instead. And maybe all that texture confusion's why we still have this bug in the game, where if you use the program art texture pack, then the zombie villagers of this type will render their fists up near their head as opposed to where they're supposed to be. In 2020, we finally got fossils added into the Nether, though early on they probably weren't one of the most useful, considering that they're only one of the 3 generated structures in the game that never generates with any loot chests, along with the swamp huts and ocean monuments. And we wouldn't technically have any special loot for these until we eventually got the dried gas and the happy gas update, but those could take a while to find, so while you're looking around, pay attention, because there actually exists 14 different variants of Nether fossils. But if all 14 creatures ended up dead, that's probably not survival of the fittest. The most structures ever added in Minecraft was on April 1st of 2020, since with the Infinite Snapshot April Fool's update, there were 43 hard-coded Easter egg dimensions, which essentially function like structures on their own. So let's do a lightning round. There's the ant dimension, which has an ant block which uses the Langdon ant algorithm to determine its pattern, the basic dimension, which generates a maze like the ones in the basic programming language, the brand dimension, which is just a bunch of creeper faces, bridges dimension, oh wow, it's a bunch of bridges, checkerboard contains all the diable blocks in 16 by 16 by 16 blocks of patterns, the colors dimension, it's just the Microsoft logo, content dimension's the YouTube gaming logo, the credits dimension is the game credits made out of netherite blocks, the custom dimension is just a bunch of caution tape and under construction design, but that could have been referencing the upcoming snapshot in 20W21A, which gave us the custom worlds feature. The fleet dimension has a fleet of end ships, but not a single elytra. Gallery dimension is just a quartz path museum with block DNA. The isolation dimension actually has a structure, the House of Bob, which definitely isn't the most inviting structure. There's just a bunch of signs that say go away and no advertisement please in Swedish, and a chest inside that has a sword named Stabby McStabface, and the highest texture item in Minecraft, a very fine item. The library dimension is a reference to the story The Library of Babel, and it also serves as the hub for this update. Llama dimension just has a llama. Yep. Message dimension just says, we apologize for the inconvenience and fire. The missing dimension, there's a shrine of quartz with beacons and a chest footprint item, plus iron golems that have absolutely no AI. The nothing dimension's a complete joke. It's a dimension with a grass block and a sign that says, I lied, this isn't nothing. And when you check your coordinates, the first 10 digits of pi. Patterns, it's just patterns. Perfection ends up being a reference to Direwolf 20's Let's Play, and it's infinitely repeating cobblestone rooms. Pillars, just a bunch of obsidian pillars. Rooms, large brick rooms with walls and ceilings. Shapes is shapes. Sky Grid is modeled after the Seth Bling map. Spiral is a mossy cobblestone spiral. Sponge is a Menger sponge style thing. The terminal's made to look like DOS. And the final specially coded dimension in this update is the last page dimension, which is 2 variants, and when you access the last one, it'll say, only purpose of this message was to troll completionists and put my name somewhere in Minecraft. Written during time of plague by Bach. All these worlds are yours except Europa. Use them together, use them in peace. And then just 2 weeks later that same year, we finally got new structures actually added to the game, starting with the Bastion Remnant, which when it was first added originally used to generate with netherite gear before they was switched over to diamond in snapshot 20W17A. In that same update, we also got ourselves the Ruined Portal, which was an idea a fan originally brought up to Notch years ago, all the way back in 2010 before they had a proper name, but it wasn't decided that they would generate naturally until 1.16. And speaking of generating naturally, did you know that a Ruined Portal can actually generate and technically light itself if it spawns inside of a woodland mansion naturally? It takes 2 Ruined Portals generating next to each other to complete it, but once they do, the lava from the nether portals can actually light up the rest of the woodland mansion, causing the fire to strike and giving you a fully completed nether portal. On November 4th of 2020, the amethyst geodes were added to the game, which is considered to be a structure-like feature, but don't get me wrong, these things do not like structures, considering that geodes, because of a bug, could actually generate next to a stronghold and break the end portal frames, making a completely unusable end portal. We went almost 2 years without a new structure added to Minecraft, but it's not because we didn't hear about it sooner. And while the Warden and the Deep Dark were originally shown off for the Caves and Cliffs update, it would actually be in 1.19 where we get the Ancient City where they were properly implemented. But what was never fully implemented was this idea to have the loot originally found inside of pots and stone chests. Which, with those ideas were cut during the concept art, this idea was actually removed from the game once the Ancient City was in it. Because when players asked why there was a structure inside of the Ancient City called the Small Portal Statue, they got curious if this mentioned some kind of fourth dimension, which was definitely not intentional, so Mojang actually full out removed it. On March 22nd of 2023, we didn't get a new village added to Minecraft, but rather the remnants of an ancient village culture. Since it's mentioned on Minecraft.net, the trail ruins were meant to be a sign of how the villagers used to live. And while these originally used to generate with sand and suspicious sand, that was eventually just changed to gravel variants. And while archaeology was thrown off all the way back in Minecraft Live of 2020, the idea for it still exists inside the trail ruins, considering that one of the rooms has 2 coal blocks and brick stairs, which is meant to be a reference to baking the pots in the original archaeology. This might not look like it, but it's actually one of the largest structures ever added to Minecraft. This is the self-building lunar base, which was added for April Fools in the voting update, and if you found one of these on the moon dimension, then it was a reference to the Acme Corporation from Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons, which if you press the golden pressure plate on top, it would start to generate this ginormous lunar base. And it's definitely big, but it's definitely not very pretty. But hey, it does generate with a few loot chests, and with all the copper-looking blocks, this seemed to be hinting at the trial chambers we would get later that year. On November 8th of 2023, the trial chambers were added in Minecraft, and with them we got one of the rarest mobs ever added to the game, since these originally spawned skeletons that were holding poison arrows, which was eventually replaced by the bogged mob that we saw introduced into the game on snapshot 24W07A. Oh, and also, I don't know why you'd ever notice this, but the color of the beds that you find in the intersections, they're randomized. So if you don't like your bed, just find a new ancient chamber, I guess. Minecraft eventually did get that fourth dimension that people were hoping for, just not in the way that they hoped for it. Since for the April Fool's prank of 2024, we got the Ruined Potato, which was the poisonous potato version of the ruined portals that we're used to generating. And like ruined portals, these can also be a bit bugged, considering that the structure is possible to be overridden by other structures like the potato villages, which could destroy the entire pedestal or the chests that generate with it. But if we fully constructed one of those potatoes, then we could take it over to the potato dimension and find a few other structures as well, such as the potato mine shaft, which are these green mine shafts that would hang underneath the potato islands, and instead of chains, they would actually be held up by potato pedicules. And then on the surface, we would find ourselves the potato village, which for the most part is basically just an uglier version of a regular village, but they do have one feature specific to them, which is that we find these hedge mazes that are made out of potato leaves. And once you've searched all of those locations for potato eyes, you could use those to locate the Potato Coliseum, which if you change the color on this image, you might realize that it looks a lot like the Bastion remnants. And it even has a full multi-stage boss fight, but unfortunately, no loot chests. Even in a whole update about the poisonous potato, it still can't be useful. The most recent structures added to Minecraft as this point was the April Fool's joke for 2025, where we got the start platform and the mine exit that you find inside of Craft Mine. Now let's look at the start platform first, which is a crafter and a lever instead of the crafting table that we normally have, because in this update, it wasn't possible to craft normally. And then over here at the mine exit, this is what we'd use to actually leave the mines when you right click. And you get pretty familiar with these, considering the whole update was built around a roguelike where you explore different dungeons like so. And within those, there could actually be multiple rooms that could generate from the shimmering key, like the boiler room, the relax room, a boring corridor, and my favorite, wow, a whole house at this price? And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, all right?